I want people to know that it is 100% legal because so many people don't even realize that it's legal in all 50 states. It's available. So, with any luck, maybe there's a cemetery near them, but making sure that they know that there are resources to find out if there's a cemetery near them. And just probably going over some of the nuts and bolts and the logistics, how it works. People don't understand that, after someone dies, you call a funeral home, whether it's a green burial or human composting or a cremation. They're so far removed from death. I will give presentations on green burial and they'll say, but what do you do?
Welcome to the Digital Legacy Podcast, where we talk about death and dying in the digital age. If you ever asked, how do I protect myself and those I love if something unexpected happened to me? You're in the right place. I'm your host, Nikki Weiss, and together we'll explore how to protect yourself in a world where both your physical and digital legacy leave a lasting impact. And we're back with another episode of Digital Legacy Podcasts, exploring death and dying in the digital age. And today I'm here with Carin. Carin and I met, back in late 2023, where she works at Noggle Funeral Home. And at Noggle Funeral Home here in Pennsylvania region, they do community events, educational events within the funeral industry. And Carin, you and Susan had offered a green burial session. So please introduce yourself and talk to us more about green burials.
Yeah, it's great to see you, Nikki. Thank you so much for the opportunity to talk to you about this. So just by way of introducing myself, my name is Carin Bonifacino. I work at Noggle and Greco Funeral Home, which are both owned by Matthew Greco. Noggle is in Quakertown. Greco is in Kennett Square, Pennsylvania. And I wear a lot of hats and do a lot of work at the funeral homes. I'm a funeral celebrant. I do a lot of outreach and education. That was one of the workshops that you attended. Susan Greco and I have created a whole series of monthly events that we call Death Conversations. So at Noggle Funeral Home, it's called Death Conversations Quakertown. And at Greco Funeral Home, it's called Death Conversations Kennett Square. Outside of my work at the funeral homes, I also am the co-founder of a nonprofit organization called Friends of Green Burial PA for Pennsylvania. And my teammates and I started the nonprofit basically to educate the public about green or natural burial. I tend to use those two words interchangeably. They mean the same thing because as natural burial becomes more widespread and more available, sadly, there are a lot of people who do not realize that it is legal in all 50 states. It is available, and it's a third option. In Pennsylvania, we don't have aquamation or human composting, but we do have green burial. So the education work that we were doing that night at Noggle Funeral Home was to get the information out to the people who might be interested. And so I do that work both in my day job at the funeral homes and in my extracurricular time on evenings and weekends. I'm out giving presentations at libraries and conferences and things like that.
So for someone who doesn't know what a green burial is, How would you describe a green burial versus a cremation or even just a regular burial?
So the first thing that I like to say to people is green burial is what all burial was up until 100 to 150 years ago. It is an unembalmed body going directly into the soil without a concrete vault or liner, and in a biodegradable casket or shroud. The cemeteries themselves are the ones that require things like concrete vaults. And so cemeteries themselves can also not require concrete vaults. So, yeah,
Can you talk to us a little bit about that? Because
yeah,
having buried both my
yeah,
parents, and then recently my uncle, and that was responsible for his arrangements,
yeah,
it would have been a jarring the cost of a vault
yes,
and the fact that it was required
yes.
by the cemetery. So a vault versus a direct burial. What is the reason that they want us to use a vault? And then what are our options not to?
So the reasons that they use the vault are really really interesting. It is so that the grave does not sink. As a wooden casket and a body decompose over time, that is going to break down and the soil is going to sink over time. A concrete vault prevents the sinking of the ground. So it very much has to do with the maintenance of the cemetery. Number one, so that their staff doesn't have to go back and add soil where the ground sinks. And it has to do with lawnmowers and equipment that's used to maintain those cemeteries so that they are not going over bumpy ground where it has sunk. So that is how they came to be. And of course, a lot of people feel like that is in some ways a more dignified thing for a person basically to be in a box in the ground. That's
A
what you,
concrete box, a wooden box in a concrete box.
correct. Correct.
That's encased.
Correct.
Inter-
And so when I say that the cemeteries require them and they can also not require them, it's because the requirement of the vault has to do with their own rules and regulations. There's no law on the books anywhere that says it's required. So I'll speak to Pennsylvania because that's the state that I'm most familiar with. Right now, we have 17 cemeteries in the state where you can be buried without the concrete vault and you can just go right into the soil in your pine box or your wicker casket. 16 of those 17 cemeteries are already existing cemeteries that have headstones and vaults and all the things. And they have set aside a section where they do not require them. One of the 17 cemeteries is a 100% natural burial ground. It's more of that nature preserve kind of concept. But yeah, the for an existing cemetery to implement it, it is as simple as them saying, over here we require the vaults, and over here we do not require them.
it's really just a designation of where the land is going to be, the use purpose of each of land.
That is correct. And I like to say that the very forward-thinking cemeteries are the ones that are making these changes, that see that off giving people options benefits them, benefits the cemetery. So, but it's not always the easiest sell trying to convince them.
When you and I first started talking, I asked specifically, so is it green burial an industry? And you corrected me and said it was a movement. So
Yeah,
share more about what this movement is like.
yeah,
If we started, kind of feel like breastfeeding, right? It's like
right,
this was the most natural thing.
right.
And then we kind of took a detour over the
Yes.
last century or so.
Yeah,
And now we're finding our way back to.
yeah.
So when did the new modern movement of green burial, or you're calling it also natural burial? That's
Yeah, so, as I said, this is the original practice of burial that we are just trying to return to, make more available. The modern green burial movement started in the US in the late 90s. The very first new natural burial grounds opened in South Carolina in the late 90s. Over the last, say, 25-ish, 27, 28 years, I think between the US and Canada now, we have around 400 cemeteries that allow this practice. But when you consider that we have 50 US states and the United States and Canada are vast territories, it's a wonderful start. But we have a long way to go to make sure everyone has access to this. If you have to drive 3, 4, 5 hours to get to the nearest green burial ground or cemetery, that's not really making it very accessible for people. So I think I use the word movement because there are still so many of us. I mean, I am one of hundreds, if not thousands, of people in the US who are actively working to try to convince existing cemeteries to allow people to do this, or people who are looking for land to create new cemeteries. It's still very much a boots on the ground, grassroots kind of thing. So I can only hope that someday it will be an industry. But right now, it's still very much a grassroots, community by community, people working to create these where they live.
So if I was to come into and say I have a loved one that just passed,
Yeah.
and or I did my pre-planning
Yeah.
and came in and discussed, like, okay, I have three options.
Yeah.
I have a traditional burial where you said there's a coffin and then a vault,
Right.
and I have a nice green pasture to be mowed over,
Right. Right.
or cremation, or this green burial, and I chose a green burial.
Yeah.
What would that conversation be like in that pre-planning stage with your team?
On the pre-planning side, it would involve, first and foremost, finding out if the family has decided which cemetery they want to be buried in. So, with luck, there's a cemetery not too far away. They've maybe bought their plots already and have those deeds or those pieces of paper. In terms of the funeral home involvement, we would explain to the family that at the time of death, someone would call the funeral home, let us know that the person has died. We would come and pick up the deceased person, bring them back to our funeral home, and keep their body in refrigeration. Because you're not doing embalming in a natural burial, then the way we preserve the body is just by keeping it cold. You can keep a body in refrigeration for a very, very long time. For most natural burials, it might be in refrigeration anywhere from 3 days to 2 weeks. Most natural burials happen somewhere in that window of 3 days to 3 weeks. While the body is being kept cold, the funeral home is assisting with arrangements to find out from the family when they would like to do the burial. Maybe they want to still have a church service or a memorial service. That could happen before the burial. That could happen after the burial. All those types of ceremony or gathering are still applicable, 100% recommended that there is still some type of memorial or gathering. And then when the day of the burial comes, the funeral home would transport again, either the pine box or the wicker casket or the shrouded body to the cemetery. And then the burial would take place. And again, maybe we first went to the church and then to the cemetery.
So you would bring the body to a church, even knowing it wasn't embalmed?
That is correct. Most churches would rather that in those cases that the body is in something like a pine box or a wicker casket. And it is okay to have an unembalmed body in a closed casket. We recently had a family that the mother wanted to be shrouded for her green burial. The church would not allow us to bring the shrouded body into the church. they said, no problem, but we don't want a shrouded body. So we had to scramble at the last minute and get a wicker casket that was absolutely beautiful. So she was in a closed casket, but a wicker casket. And we had the church service at the Catholic Church and then went to the cemetery and did the burial afterwards. So
when you mentioned shrouds, I'm just thinking of some of the traditional burials around the world, right? Because
sure.
I
Oh, sure.
really, and I'm thinking how they literally, I mean, it's the body wrapped in a shroud,
Right.
in a cloth
In
of some
cloth.
sacred cloth,
Yeah.
and people are literally carrying the body. Like
Yes.
there's nothing
Yes.
between them and the body except the shroud.
Yes.
I
Well,
mean, as honorable as it is, but is that something that's being adopted here in the States?
well, I mean, here's what I can tell you. Interestingly, Muslims and Jews have never stopped using, natural burial and shrouds. So this practice that seems kind of like fringy and woo woo in some people's minds has in fact continued to go on in the United States uninterrupted in traditional Jewish cemeteries, in traditional Muslim cemeteries. And what you described of the family members carrying that shrouded body to the grave has been going on all along, right? If you're a member of those religious communities, that might be all you've ever experienced. We're just trying to move it more into the sphere of people who are not of those faiths. But absolutely, it is that most modern green cemeteries, if the body is shrouded, there actually would be a board of some sort underneath.
Okay.
But I have seen pictures of the Muslim cemeteries and burials where, just as you described, they are carrying that body, and the only thing is that cloth or that fabric.
I had to chuckle a little bit
Yeah.
because being Jewish,
Okay.
I'm very,
Yeah.
and I had buried my uncle last year.
Yeah.
And so Jewish, for those that don't know, Jewish traditions, we do not embalm.
Right.
And also in Jewish traditions, we are very quick to bury our dead. But Jewish cemeteries require vaults.
Right.
So we're kind of greenish,
Right.
but not so green.
Close. Close. Yeah.
It's like, if we could just, and also in Jewish tradition, or very religious Jewish tradition, they will bury in a pine box.
Correct. Yes.
But if you want to be buried in a pine box in a Jewish cemetery, you're still going to be buried in a vault.
Yeah.
So it is, but what I know, what Noggle is looking for and what some of these other cemeteries are offering is, and talk to us more about it.
Sure.
What is that ideal, literally a green pasture? So walk me through it.
The cemetery itself would be maintained in as natural a state as possible.
Like a park.
I mean, actually, almost more like a nature preserve. A true 100% natural burial ground. There would be almost no indication that it was a cemetery in the ways that you would normally think of one. The ideal is that it's a nature preserve that is as, that there's as little disturbance as possible. It might have hiking trails. People may just go there to walk for their own, exercise or things like that. Green, I'll get a little technical. Green graves are not as deep as modern graves. We think of 6 feet under as being this, standard. 6 feet under, that depth came into being when the vaults came into being. It has to do with the vaults themselves. So in natural burial, the proper depth is 3 to 4 feet. And I bring that up for a couple reasons. One, because if you go 6 feet under, there's not enough microbial activity for the body to decompose in a reasonable amount of time. The other reason I bring it up is because there is less disturbance to the land because you are digging a shallower grave. The other thing that's important to mention is that in terms of how many bodies can you bury per acre, in modern cemeteries, they will place as many as 1,200 people on a single acre because natural burial is trying to be gentler and kinder to the earth and is trying to again have cemeteries that look much less like cemeteries. The density per acre might be anywhere from 300 bodies per acre to 800, and it really depends. So the more natural the cemetery, quite frankly, the less bodies per acre. So so that's some of the philosophy behind it. It's really about de-emphasizing our wishes as human beings to have big giant stone markers and monuments saying, I did all these amazing things, here's my right, and really saying my body is organic material. I am returning it to the earth, which will recycle all this organic material. Yes, use it to feed the wildflowers, the meadow where those bodies are being buried, and let it all return to the earth.
Some of the materials, so the shrouds, what are they usually made of?
Ideally it would be, organic cotton or linen. You wouldn't want something synthetic in there. It should be something that will biodegrade pretty rapidly, pretty quickly, and be 100% natural.
And then you mentioned the wicker
Right?
casket. So talk to us,
Yeah.
that's something I've never seen one before.
Yeah. So there are beautiful, beautiful examples of hand woven wicker caskets that you can find online. One resource that I highly recommend to folks is a website that is called Funerary, ARY. It's like funer with airy, Funerary Artisans Collective. And it's a group of United States artisans that have pulled together, created a website. And so depending on what part of the country you live in, you can find either woodworkers who are building, pine boxes that are green burial suited, or weavers who are hand weaving these wicker caskets, usually out of willow, and they're absolutely gorgeous. If you can picture like a wicker furniture, right, that has that, it looks like a piece of wicker furniture, except it's in the shape of a casket, and there's usually a lid that pops right on. And and there are people who are making them here in the US. There are, of course, companies that are also making them overseas and shipping them into the US. I get a little nervous about, labor, who's doing the weaving, how are they getting paid. For folks who really want that kind, I send them to that website in particular because these are US artisans, and you're supporting someone in their livelihood if you buy
Fair market
those.
trade.
Absolutely.
Can you talk, do you have pricing that you could share with the audience?
I can.
Not so people aren't sticker shock, right?
Yeah. So unfortunately, when something is handmade, it's not cheap. So I'll share with you kind of the 3 price points, with the shroud being the cheapest, the pine box or the wooden casket being the mid-priced, and then the wicker casket. A shroud, and some of those are hand woven as well, but they usually run anywhere from $300 to $500. The pine box will set most people back anywhere, I would say, from $500 to $1,500, or even $2,000 if it's whatever, but 500 to 1500. And the wicker caskets anywhere from 1500 to 3500, just depending. So yeah, there's three different kind of price points.
But still, the wicker baskets compared to a very elaborate mahogany. I'm thinking like, what are those high end
Interestingly, when, yeah, 100%. I mean, there are caskets that can cost
baskets are just,
10,000 or,
lined and
and yet
the
I
more
will tell you
like
that working at two different funeral homes, the average person doesn't spend more than $3,000 for a casket. And most people spend more like 1,500 to 2,000. The idea that people are still spending thousands and thousands and thousands, it doesn't bear out at our funeral homes. Most people realize this is just going to get put in the ground. So why would you spend $10,000? With rare exceptions. Yeah, most people buy caskets that are what we would consider, I suppose, reasonably priced.
so in the state of
Yeah.
Pennsylvania, human composting does not exist currently, correct?
Not has not been legalized yet. I'm pretty sure that a bill has been introduced. What's going on with that bill? You hear like bills are in committees and things. I'm not following that closely, but I know there are people in the legislature who are trying to introduce a bill to have it legalized.
So what states is human composting
My goodness,
available?
it is getting legalized so rapidly across the country. We might be up to, I have not looked lately. It's at least six, maybe eight. I mean, Delaware just legalized it. New Jersey, it's like every time, maybe we're up to 10. It feels like it's spreading very rapidly. Now, that being said, if I may, even though those states are legalizing it, those facilities still have to be built. And so my guess is that's going to take a number of years, right? That process is done in a facility. So those have to be built. They have to, so that's going to take time.
For those listeners who are not familiar, so
Sure.
we just talked about green burial,
Right,
which is that natural burial, a direct burial,
right,
either a shroud, a pine box, or a wicker that you go directly into the ground.
right.
And now we're kind of moving on to, can we say that human composting is green? I mean, or
We can. And here's what I will tell you. So everything we know has a carbon footprint, right? We are human beings on this planet. We can't do anything without using carbon. When I talk about someone dying and the funeral home coming to pick up that body to take it back and keep it refrigerated, that was a fossil fuel burning vehicle that went and picked them up, and the funeral home uses electricity to refrigerate, right? So human composting definitely has a higher carbon footprint than natural burial. Natural burial is minimal, really, really minimal, especially if you're talking about, if there's a local craftsperson who makes your pine box, then maybe that pine box is only coming from 5 miles away or 10 miles away. It's, in a perfect world, a natural burial. The number that I have heard, generates maybe 25 pounds of carbon. It might be as little as that. Human composting, because it is done in a building, right? That building is using carbon for these processes.
the sites I've seen, I mean, I've educated
Right,
myself on TikTok.
right,
There's several influencers out there
right.
that are talking about human composting.
Sure.
The warehouse has to be kept at a certain temperature. They're
Correct.
bringing in, right?
Right, right. And the other aspect of it that is a significant carbon generator. Again, we're still talking about something that's better than cremation, better than burial with, the concrete vault and all of that. When the deceased person is placed on this bed, we'll say, because the human composting is done in a chamber of sorts. So the person is laid on a bed that then is slid into that chamber. They are laying on a bed of organic material. It's wood chips, it's alfalfa, it's other organic matter that is going to help accelerate that decomposition process. So all of those materials, those organic materials, have to be grown somewhere. They have to be harvested somewhere. Then they have to be shipped to that, composting facility. My understanding is that is where a large amount of the carbon for that process comes from. It's in that growing, harvesting, storing, and transporting of those materials. So it is very much a natural process. And the human composting is a very controlled environment where, temperature, air circulation, are all monitored in a way that they can accelerate. I like to say to people, green burial is slow composting. The exact same thing is going to happen, but over a much longer period of time. Human composting is you create the ideal conditions for an accelerated composting process. And so in 4 to 6 weeks, they can return to the family soil that is their loved one's body combined with those other organic materials. And that's that. And they can plant a tree, or they can donate that soil to, another project. So it's super cool. I think it would be wonderful if it was legal in all 50 states. It's about giving people options, right? Everybody, I think, should have a right to choose. And I say that even cremation, even modern burial. I am the last person who's going to tell people they're wrong. That's not the case at all. I would like people to have all the options, so they can decide for themselves what is, do I hope that people will choose natural burial because they're concerned about the carbon in the atmosphere and all of that? Of course. But if somebody really feels like cremation is the method for them, then yeah.
So expanding, making sure that we're capturing when we say green, right? So mushroom suits, right? Should we stop there?
Let's
Okay.
stop right there. So I did a tremendous amount of research on mushroom suits because people kept asking me about them. There was a company that was making them. They are no longer making them. As far as I know, they are not available currently on the market. I'm sure there are people working on prototypes. But the other thing that I think is important to point out is everything costs money. A mushroom suit is probably another, as you're talking about, the costs, not for less than $1,000, probably $1,500, $2,000.
And where do you put the body while it's decomposing?
Well,
Right?
I mean, it would be in the ground. I think the mushroom suit was created as something that would contribute to like a natural burial. Like you can be
So
wrapped
you would put the mushroom suit on and then a shroud.
and then a
And
shroud, or then in the box and then go in the ground. And quite frankly, like the decomposition process is going to happen with or without a mushroom suit, right?
okay.
So yeah, I think I love mushrooms. I live in Kennett Square, but yeah,
For those that don't know, Kennett Square is
the
the
mushroom
mushroom
capital of the
capital
world. Yes,
of the world, right? I
of the
wasn't sure
world.
it's of the world. So
Yes.
look that one up. So
Yeah. But it's kind of, I think it's a little novel. People get excited, and I kind of want to say, like, I don't know if you need to spend another $2,000 for something that's going to happen with or without your mushroom suit. You'll be
but the idea is to making meaningful, right? The idea is,
yeah,
if I'm doing a pre-planning, if I'm
yeah,
thinking about the decisions I want to make today, so my
right,
family doesn't have to make
yep,
them when the time
yep,
comes. These are things to consider.
right.
So I just want to kind of circle back. We've talked a lot about the natural,
Yeah.
but because this is death and dying the digital age, I
Yeah.
do want to kind of add that spin to
Sure.
what technology
Yeah.
within the green burials might be used. So
Yeah.
GPS locators,
Yeah.
QR codes,
Yeah.
where do you see technology might be added within the green
Absolutely.
burial, natural burial? Go ahead.
So some green cemeteries are large enough that they will provide a GPS coordinate to the family to help them find that grave site in the future. Even if it has a marker, if it's a 50-acre cemetery, the family might just, this way they can use that GPS coordinate to always go right back to the spot. In terms of QR codes, I know that regular cemeteries are beginning to put QR codes on headstones. And I would not be surprised if natural cemeteries are not already, some of them, doing the same thing. Again, if there isn't a traditional marker, maybe there would be a place in the cemetery where people who are buried there, you could scan the QR code and it would take you to that person's obituary. And you'd be able to learn something about that person by virtue of the QR code. I mean, I'm trying to think of other ways that technology might be used in this movement. Certainly, there is a place. Certainly, social media, as you have said, is a phenomenal place to learn more about this. All the green burial education organizations, the Green Burial Council, and the Conservation Burial Alliance, and these amazing organizations all are on social media, all have websites.
Well, maybe what we'll do is the websites that you just mentioned, we'll
Sure.
add that to our resource section
Sure.
in order to highlight our conversation
Sure.
here. And just to close out our conversation, Carin, tips and tricks, lessons learned. If this is something I want to, as a consumer, want
Yeah.
to explore more on,
Yeah.
um, what are some things red flags, right?
Mm.
Like you said, the mushroom suits, those could be a red flag. So what are
Yeah.
some other red flags or lessons learned I should be aware of?
It's a great question. It's a great question. I would say that if anyone is interested in this and calls a funeral home just to say, like, hey, I've heard of this. Is this something you can help me with? Red flags would be a funeral home that tells you it's not legal, that you can't do that, but we can bury you in the local cemetery and we'll turn the vault upside down. Some
Oh, talk about that.
Yeah, some funeral homes will promote that they do a green kind of burial. So by turning the vault upside down, basically what they're telling people is, we'll take your casket and we'll put it directly into the soil so that the casket
Husband.
is in contact. They'll turn the vault upside down so that they're still able to prevent the ground from sinking. The body is in contact with the soil, so it will, and they'll say, that's green. Like, we'll just turn the vault upside down. Major red.
And charge you a premium for that too.
Oh, 100%. Right. So yeah, those,
Interesting.
right, telling you it's not legal, that you can't do that, we'll just turn the vault upside down. Those are all red flags. Hang up and call another funeral home.
So buyer beware, right? When they say we do green, ask them to walk you through
Right.
what their green process is.
Right. I mean, the other thing is there are green friendly embalming fluids. And sometimes a family may want to have a public viewing of their loved one for any number of reasons. Green cemeteries typically will allow certain products, certain non-toxic products, to be used as a kind of embalming, but that is also not required. So I would say another red flag would be a funeral home saying, oh yeah, we can help you and we'll do the embalming with essential oils and yada, yada. If you don't want embalming, again, it's not required. So yes, buyer beware.
Buyer beware, and being an advocate.
Yes.
Right. Again, I can't emphasize enough to have these conversations while you are of sound mind, to be able to think of your future, knowing it's good to have a plan.
Yeah.
My final playbook, that is the importance of understanding the legal, financial, physical, which is what we're talking about today, and digital aspects of the life that you've built. Carin, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Your expertise is wonderful. And I know I want to have you back because we want to talk about obituaries and writing one's obituary. So
perfect.
We'll go ahead and schedule that out in a couple months from now. But with that, thank you so much and appreciate your time.
You're welcome.
All right.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to the Digital Legacy Podcast, where we talk about death and dying in the digital age. I hope this conversation inspired you to take control and plan for the inevitable to protect yourself and those you leave behind. Don't forget to subscribe to our newsletter at digitallegacypodcast.com. Remember, life is full of surprises. What happens after you die shouldn't be. So keep your passwords safe and your playbook up to date.